Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for FourCast is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
What sort of future do you think we're heading for? How will we live as we slip into the 21st century?
Welcome to FourCast, episode 41. I'm Tom Merritt.
I am Scott Johnson.
And this is the show where we play around with ideas about the future with a couple of guests, hence the name FourCast, because there's four of us. We're going to have four segments to the show. Joining us today, first of all, Andrew Mayne, magician, illusion designer, and filmmaker, and the publisher of WeirdThings.com. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, guys. Thank you for having me here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Even if you do know Justin Robert Young, we won't hold that against you.
Hey, listen, even his parole officer's got to talk to him once in a while.
Yeah, I know. Can you imagine being his mom?
Oh, man.
No, we're kidding.
His mom's a saint.
His mom is this parole officer?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Funny how it works out that way.
No, we love jury. Just a little teasing there. Also joining us is Paul Zak, professor at Claremont Graduate University in Southern California, also known as the Oxytocin Doctor. Welcome, Mr. Zak. Dr. Zak.
You.
How do you prefer to be called?
Anything. Hey, you is fine. Great to be here, Tom.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate having you on and sharing a trusting perspective on the future, I would guess, right?
Very trusting. Optimistic, maybe.
Good. Actually, that is unusual. You'd be surprised. Maybe you wouldn't be surprised how often the people we have on have very bleak visions of the future.
They're all wrong. All wrong.
All right, well, let's start off with one of our listener predictions. You can email us, fourcastpodcast@gmail.com, like John did. John Inc. says, everyone keeps thinking that we're going to move forward when we make better batteries or find new ways to make electricity. I think our next jump forward has to do with replacing electricity itself. We will find a better way to transmit and use energy that will eventually make electricity obsolete. Maybe we'll discover a new particle that's smaller and faster than the electron, maybe something that can be pulled from the air, or maybe we'll find some biological answer.
Oh, wow. Okay. John Inc., I would say this to you. Brilliant! This is the one thing we've never really thought about. We keep thinking about how we're going to preserve stuff, how we're going to keep energy happening the way it is now. We're coming up with cleaner forms of energy, but we all still sort of hover around existing technologies and existing types of energy and the kinds of consumption that we're already sort of used to. This is great out-of-the-box thinking about electricity in a way that we haven't before, which is doing away with it and coming up with something better. Now, I'm no electrician, and I'm no electrophysiologist, whatever the crap one of those guys would be called. And maybe Paul knows someone like that there at the university. But this seems like a great way to move to a new level of sort of energy consumption as people.
Anyway. I agree. This is a really, really good perspective change, a perspective shift that John has pointed out, where we all are racking our brains with other ways to generate electricity. But and I bet there is, but is anybody out there working on something else that can provide motor power? I mean, there's steam is the only other thing I can think of that is even still used besides electricity to move things.
Well, with electricity, we're not really making it, right? We're harnessing it. So electricity is it's a thing that we figured out how to tap into and then hone for our needs. I don't necessarily see electricity as the thing that we need to necessarily get rid of, but I think it's an important distinction to make that electricity isn't like fossil fuels or whatever that just sort of come out of nothing. I mean, we really figured out a way to say, all right, electrical currents and the way that electrons work and the way that atoms work, all of this stuff is going to, provide something that we can actually tap into and use for ourselves. So maybe the question isn't so much about getting rid of electricity, but figuring out a way to let, electricity do more or tap into it further so that we're actually getting further down the road in technology and not relying on old ideas so much.
Now, Andrew, were you going to say something there?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because I would have said, 10 years ago, that would be really a crazy statement. And I remember when I was a kid watching Buck Rogers, and they made some comment about, we haven't used electricity for 100 years. And as a kid, I'm like, that's a stupid thing to say because, it's a fundamental process that works on, it's one of the fundamental fundamental atomic forces. But, now we're finding in biology that quantum physics comes into play. There's some new research that comes out that talks how DNA may stick together because of quantum forces, and then you get stuff where people talk about 0-point energy, which is still such a fringy kind of thing, but who knows? There might be some fundamental quantum properties that we're just now, I mean, we're observing these things on a biological level, and that's where we sort of find the things we exploit. Not as crazy I would have thought even just 2 years ago. Of course, we need to kind of know what that's going to be before we just give up, because electricity is great. Electricity is absolutely great. The hard part is just the generation and the transmission of it and the storage. If you solve those problems, then we'll be using it for a long time, but there might be other things that come into play.
What if it's safer than electricity, whatever we find? Something that, electricity has some significant dangers involving, shocking you and exploding and all that sort of thing.
That's the danger of anything that has energy potential. If it has potential, it means it's energetic. So you're not going to get away from that. And the more efficient you find, the much more potentially dangerous it would be, because the much more amount of energy you have in there. A battery exploding is nowhere near as damaging as that much uranium exploding.
Sure. I could see a situation though where somehow it's got a lot of energy, but it doesn't work on a human being. We're resistant to it, and so the danger of that energy is limited in some way. You could still have explosions or anything like that, but maybe touching it wouldn't be a problem, and you could have batteries that just are exposed on the outside. Although that doesn't work so well for antennas these days, so maybe that's not such a good idea.
Well, it's. Maybe if the amount of danger, it's interesting, is we talk about how dangerous is a car battery. Well, a car battery is a lot safer than a tank full of gasoline.
Hell yeah.
You'll drop a Tesla battery off a 3-story building and not worry. If you try to do the same with a car, a tank full of gasoline, much more likely to have a problem. So we sometimes tend to overestimate the things that seem newer to us as far as danger. Like nuclear reactors are a great example of how it's the safest form of energy production there is. But because we have these very, very visual examples of what happens when it goes wrong, or the use of them in things like bombs, we think of it as being far more dangerous. But now you talk about pebble-fed reactors and things like that. And, I think part of this is just the paradigm we're thinking it is sort of the problem.
And think about it. There's nothing, that is particularly safe about steam energy, the predecessor of electricity, and this idea of pushing things with hot steam that could just burn you.
Look up boiler explosions on a New York Times search. You'll find people got killed by those all the time. That was a very, very dangerous job.
Paul, do you work with or see anything like this that would point the way towards something that would replace electricity? Or do you think that's kind of goes in our crazy predictions section?
I think you guys are smoking the ganja. So the whole world works on electricity. Biology works on electricity. Plants work on electricity. You can't get rid of electricity because you can't get rid of the fundamentals of nature. So electricity is what we've got. No, you can't get rid of it.
All right, maybe we can just be less jerks about how we make it. You know what I mean? That's all. I mean, less coal, less reliance on stuff we don't see. We don't see how the sausage is made, so we think electricity's great. It's powering my really clean computers that are super recyclable, and I'm a green user and stuff. But you forget how much, how many pounds of coal it takes me to do what the crap we're doing right now. It's just that kind of stuff I'd love to see change.
All right. Well, now I feel bad about burning so much coal on that email, but you can send us your predictions, and we promise to provide carbon credits or something. I don't know. Email us fourcastpodcast@gmail.com, or you can post them right up on our blog at fourcastpodcast.com. Let's move on to the short-term predictions. These are what we think will happen in the next few years. Could be in your area of expertise, but it doesn't have to be. It's the nearer-term stuff. And let's start with you, Paul. What do you think in your short-term crystal ball you think is going to happen here or elsewhere in the universe?
Short-term crystal ball, we're going to see hybrid human robots. We're going to see human beings with electrodes in their brains. We'll see elective surgeries to replace flimsy old arms with strong, powerful bionic arms. I think we're going to see people merging with machines in the next 10 years.
All right, we're having a little problem with the audio, so I think I got most of it, which was a hybrid human was in there somewhere. But I think we're going to call you back. Bear with us.
I was going to make a remark that the irony wasn't lost on me that he actually sounded like a human robot hybrid as he.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if he was saying a hybrid human with a robot, or if I was just imagining that because the audio sounded that way. Meanwhile, while we're bringing him back up, let's actually start our short-term prediction with Andrew. Go ahead and lay it on us. What do you think?
I'm going to make a very, very short-term prediction, and I don't know if it's really my area of expertise, but something I interact with every day. And I've seen not really a whole lot of coverage of this, but it involves Google. Have you noticed that like Google just acquired another game company, and they're getting into the content space, which seems kind of unusual if you think about where Google was 5 years ago. Why is Google getting into content, in the content area, which would be an area you'd think theoretically they'd want to stay away from? They've announced that they're going to be selling music. They're going to try and have a games platform. And I think that they've got some sort of long-term spreadsheet. They've looked at how fewer and fewer people, as people become more experienced, they're less likely to click on AdWords. I can't remember the last time I clicked on one. I use Google products all the time. I ask my friends, and my friends who are more experienced, they use it less. And as our parents and people who just got into the internet a couple of years ago become more used to search and doing these things and understanding where the things are they want and where the things they don't want, making revenue from that area is not as profitable. Now, they're going through explosive growth. Tons of people are coming to Google all the time, but if they look at what happens to the average user over time, I think it just declines as far as the amount of money they make through that kind of revenue, even though they get more data. So my prediction is Google is realizing that search is not going to end, but that there's a reason why they're doing these sort of things, and we're going to see probably a fundamental shift in how Google makes money.
I think you're onto something there, in them, not necessarily that search engine advertising even necessarily would decline, because I think it works a little like spam. You only need a very small percentage of people to click on it for it to turn, but they're seeing the plateau. And so whether it declines or not, they know, hey, we've got to diversify. We've got to start coming up with other ways of feeding the beast and spreading out not only advertising but other ways of making money. Though they very vociferously say we are not going to get into the game of making content. Do you think they're just blowing smoke?
Well, what does it say when they're talking about doing music, selling music or partnering for placement? They just bought a new travel company that sells travel services. They've got, the game, again, they're buying a games platform, the company that makes content. How is that? I mean, I have no problem with that. I think Google, I want to see where they go. I think the market should decide. But I think you're absolutely right. Search is not going to end. And there is, for the number of people who are using Google on a regular basis, there are 10 times that many people waiting out there. But if they look at guys like you and Scott and Paul and myself and other users out there, the people listening to the show, I'm willing to bet they see that decline. So they're thinking, how do they get revenue there? And I think they're going to make a trade-off, which, they said they were going to hands off China, then all of a sudden they went back into China. Why? Yeah. And I think part of growth, and I think it's an essential part of growth. So
I think I totally agree with what you're saying, Andrew, and it rings really true today, because we're hearing all this stuff from Google now that they want to get into these markets that traditionally companies like Apple and other media companies have sort of dominated in, and they want to get a piece of that. I think if they were just going to rest on the laurels of the money they've made from advertising and the way that it ties into search, then that's what they would be doing. But they know the writing's on the wall, and there's a certain, I don't know if it's a plateau or a cap or a ceiling, but there's a certain place where you're kind of getting diminished returns. Even if the internet experiences continued growth, and if whether that's worldwide or not, it continues to grow in certain ways, there's a certain sort of just place where you kind of, peter out in the middle, and they'll still dominate it, and they'll still hold that, the strong position in that market. But, moving into cell phones and OSs and all this crazy crap they do, and buying companies like YouTube, and, don't forget, YouTube has the potential. They're already, the most ubiquitous name in terms of video online, but they have the potential to kill everybody in a lot of ways if they just flip the switch and do things. And I can think of a million ways they could do it. But these are all just signs of Google saying, well, we can't rely on this one cash cow forever. We have to diversify, and that's all they're doing.
Well, let me ask you guys this question then. As content creators, and I think a lot of the listeners are also in that area too, that for a while we looked at the future was going to be kind of this thing as people decided they were going to find other means to get stuff, either for free, torrents or whatever, legal, quasi-legal, what have you, illegal. part of the thing we talked about was the idea of like, okay, make it freely available. And then Google was this great idea, this platform where you could monetize it through AdWords. That would be what you would do. You could do this sort of AdWord monetization. And we kind of could talk about a future like where YouTube and things like that work, where, hey, it's going to be ad supported. But if we're seeing this decline in the effectiveness, the efficacy of advertising in that medium, what does that mean for content creators who are smaller independents who don't have the infrastructure to build that? I mean, how does that shape or change the way you think about going forward about your own content?
I don't think it shapes the way I think about it, because I don't see that as a real big revenue stream for me right now. That is, and I'm just speaking from the podcasting side of things more than anything, rather than. But I have thrown Google AdSense up on blogs, and I just don't have the carriage or the interest to make a lot of money. I think I've made less than $20 over the past 3 years on Google AdSense, and I'm exaggerating there. I mean, it's probably less than $5.
I do a heck of a lot more with sponsorships, and a heck of a lot more with special arrangements with niche-oriented companies who are interested in advertising either on shows or on the sites or in some other way. And Google AdWords tried it all, messed around with it, made a few $100s here and there, never really panned out to be much more than that. So I don't think the small content creators are all that chuffed about it, because I don't think they're getting much now anyway.
Well, I guess my question was kind of more like a broader sense. Like, yeah, we don't use on any of the on iTricks.com or things. We don't use any of the Google AdSense. And it was I thought it was kind of funny when Dan Lyons, fake Steve Jobs, talked about how bloggers can't make money because he only made X amount of dollars from Google AdWords, which was like, you know, you've got a blog that's one of those traffic popular things going on in that genre, and his only idea was to try to do Google AdWords. It was like very, very frustrating to say you just missed out on a big opportunity. But I got to think sort of just in sort of the broader sense that you know, we have we have to sort of talk. Advertisers get AdWords, they get that, and there is an advantage to certain advertisers in a certain way. But even in sort of a broader scheme, when how much work do you have to put in for your affiliates and the sponsored sort of stuff? And as more people start doing that, does that become a crowded space where it's going to get harder to do? Or, are these advertisers going to get educated and see the value of this stuff? One thing I'm hoping Google will do as part of your prediction is move into becoming an ISP and providing really, really cheap bandwidth to all of us, so that Paul Zach will never have this problem again. Are you back, Paul? All right, so let's go ahead and get your short-term prediction involving
robot-human hybrids.
Excellent.
So we will see human beings who choose to have parts implanted in them. So now we have patients who have electrodes implanted in their brains. We have amputees who have what might be called bionic limbs. But in the near future, we're going to see people choosing to get computer chips implanted in their brains, people choosing to get special kinds of limbs put in. And I know, Tom, you need a cast iron stomach so that you can digest all those hamburgers you have for lunch.
Yeah, how did you know I had hamburgers for lunch?
Hamburger? It's a gas. No, I don't know.
He's a doctor, Tom.
That's impressive.
Knows things.
How large were they? No, I'm liking this idea of robot human hybrid. But at what point does it end? I mean, how far do we go? Are we sort of just augmenting, or are we thinking, you know what, we're replacing everything but the brain? Or are we even going to replace the brain?
Yes. Wouldn't it be great to have like a hard drive for your brain where everything that happens to you, you just get to download and save and come back to?
Oh, it'd be brilliant. I mean, the
cameras in your eyes. I just wanted cameras in my eyes. When you have these great adventures and you want to be able to tell somebody about it, and you're like, oh man, this was amazing. This thing happened to me, and you ought to have seen it, but you can't see it. So have a cameras in the eyes. It'd be great.
Yeah, I just got back from the eye doctor, and I'm being told, I'm a pretty young guy, all right, but I'm being told that I have what's called early onset cataract in my left eye. So I have this, so I just poked at it with a screwdriver. Maybe that's my problem. But anyway, I've got this cataract just starting to form. It's way minor. He thinks like 5-6 years before I even have to think about it, even doing anything with it. But still, I'm like, no, okay, now's the time to take this crappy left eye I was born with, this thing that's constantly giving me trouble. I have a birthmark on my left eye. And I know no one's even heard of this before, except maybe Dr. Zach. Maybe he has. But there's no like, I don't know anybody else with a birthmark on their eye. They've all got them on their butts or their arms or whatever. I've got one smack on my eye. So they're always having to make sure that doesn't change or evolve or do anything weird. So it's time for my ocular implant. It is time for this to be taken out and some kind of robotic eye with like super zoom vision, whatever. So I embrace your future.
And this is your near-term prediction, correct?
This is my prediction. This is going to happen in the next 5 years.
Next 5 years, you're going to have your road. So that's perfect. That's just in time to fix your cataract.
Yes, I'm ready. Bring it on. I'm totally ready for this. Both eyes. Do them both. Do them all at once. Two for one.
Two for one special.
I'm sick of these fleshy, stupid eyeballs. It's time for, and I need to see. It's totally required for everything I do. I've got to be able to see things. So I'm ready for this. I just wish it would happen sooner.
Let's move on to our long-term predictions. These are the farther down the road predictions. They could be weirder. They could be turning your world upside down. They are, however, I don't know, 100+ years down the road. Could maybe be 50+ years, but not something we're necessarily going to see in our lifetime. And tempting the gods of bandwidth, I will turn to you, Dr. Zach, to start us with your long-term prediction.
My long-term prediction is that we will repeal the law of gravity. Gravity sucks. I mean, literally.
We will repeal the law. We'll. So what assembly has the right to repeal that? Or how will this happen? How will we repeal the law of gravity? I like this.
We just have a big machine. We'll just reverse everything else. Think how nice your life would be if you could just float places. The airplane's way out of bounds. Right now, we're just going to be flapping our arms. We'll be floating across places. All that issue about working out, forget it. You're just going to float places. It'll be great fun.
Won't that be horrible for our cardiovascular system, though?
No, we'll be flapping our arms to fly here and forth. All those dreams you had about yourself flying? That's the future. You're going to be flying now. You're just going to be floating in the air. Go whatever you want. We've had enough of gravity. Come on, we've had thousands of years, billions of years of gravity. I say give it.
It's about time for gravity to go. What do you think, Andrew?
It's the funny thing about predictions when we talk about ranges or ballpark or terms like that. And I would say, my near term and somebody else's far term may be totally different. But I think in a more mundane thing, I think that we're going to see aviation change with electroaerodynamics, where instead of moving air through engines, we're going to move air over the surface of materials. Much, like you have if you have a charge here and you can move air across the surface of a material by striating it. I think before we get to Paul's anti-gravity, we're going to radically change the way we think about vehicles and how things move, particularly through air, and have basically things that the skins actually are the engine itself and are electric, and that'll look pretty cool. It's not as cool as Paul's, we're going to fly yet, but I think that's going to be something we'll probably see. We'll probably see near term, lighter than air vehicles that use that method of propulsion, and then we're going to start seeing heavier than air stuff as we have more efficient energy power plants for it, because ultimately it would be a very efficient way to move stuff.
Well, now, Andrew, as yours sounds more reasonable, I think Paul's has more fun to it. It's sort of the fizzy lifting drink effect.
I can't disagree with that. I'm saying before we get to Paul's, we'll have this.
So this is a step in that direction. So on this show, we always get a lot of people predict the flying cars and the vehicles. Like, a lot of people have come in here and said, yeah, it's going to be like Minority Report, and all our computers are going to be in the air. We're going to be in cars that take us everywhere, and they hover on stuff. And so we get that all the time, but nobody's really come in here and said the material itself will interact with either the electrons around it or the air around it to be the machine itself. That's a pretty brilliant idea.
Thank you. Have you ever seen? You ever seen they have these things called lifters? And what you do is you take a high voltage transformer and you have a sheet of foil here and a sheet of foil here, and you apply a charge up here and you have an opposite charge there, and it causes a current of air to move from the top to down there. And these things float. If you look up like electro or electric lifter online, you'll see YouTube videos. They're real things. When I was working in the skeptical paranormal world, people would go, "Oh, it's a UFO." Like, no, we know the phenomenon. It's like a Van de Graaff generator. It's very, very high voltage electricity. But people are talking about scaling that thing down for microchips to move air across the surface to keep them cooler. But if you can take that actual thing that you're doing there and then just skin the entire surface of an aircraft with it and then have a lot of electricity, but again, you're getting rid of a ton of weight now, you can actually make the whole thing into an aerodynamic shape. And, we can get into metamaterials and other such kinds of technology, but I think that's going to be the thing that we'll go, holy cow, that's kind of a cool thing for how this works.
Paul, what do you think? Now that you've seen another side of this, do you still like the more general repeal of gravity?
What I love about Andrew is that he thinks so carefully and so simply in these really useful ideas. But we're talking about long-term or medium-term here. Let's go nuts. Floating this and that. Come on, Andrew, get on board with no gravity.
Okay, I'll go nuts. I mean, again, something that I wouldn't have accepted a couple years ago, and that is there is increasing amounts of evidence that the speed of light is not a constant. Some experiments suggest that it was different at the start of the universe, it was different later on. It may change locality, and if you can figure out why that is, even things that I would have thought ridiculously impossible, like faster than light travel, may actually be possible, contingent upon the idea that speed of light is not a constant, which everything we know should say that it is, but there's experimental evidence now that says that it's not. So there, in your face, Paul.
I love it.
All right, we'll save a little bit of the crazy for our next segment, the crazy ass predictions. These can be 10,000 or more years in the future, or really just wild. We've actually had recently some near-term crazy predictions. It can happen. So just turning to your craziest idea of what may happen in the future, Andrew Mayne, what do you got for us?
Okay, here's the thing. Okay. I just finished reading a great book by a friend of Paul's and a friend of mine by Matt Ridley called The Rational Optimist. And he makes a very good point that people keep forgetting, and it's the same sort of point that Ray Kurzweil talks about, and that is technology progresses exponentially. We tend to think of the future as just a bigger version of the past. But if you look at what somebody's idea of what the year 2000 would look like in the year 1900, they never would have, every prediction they had, every rational prediction they had, we exceeded. So when you talk about a 10,000-year prediction, a 100-year prediction is going to be just as wild and crazy in my mind, but just as likely to be true. You've probably had people talk about the singularity on here, so I won't go into that, but that's one of those things that I came into as a skeptic, and now I accept it. But prior to the idea of the singularity, I think we'll have the pseudo-singularity. And the pseudo-singularity is when materials technology, the cost of production, medical technology, all these things have got radically so advanced, the economy doubling every week or so, that the surface of your house, everything changes, our integration into telepresence, all these things, it's going to feel like it's the year 3000, but this could be 2060. So that made no sense at all.
In what way is it when you have the pseudo singularity? Can you tell the difference between that and the real one?
Well, for the average person, the difference would be, and the singularity is going to be when you have like your super intelligent AI that's smarter than us and doubling its rate of intelligence at an exponential rate, that you have immortality and these sort of things. But you get a point with every technology. We talk about nanotech forever, and the idea that if you read books about nanotechnology in the early 90s, you thought for us to enjoy the benefits of nanotechnology, we had to have these microassemblers or whatnot. But then we find out that, well, before you get to that stage, you can do a lot of interesting things on nanoscales. The same thing with quantum physics, is we thought like early on, well, if we had a quantum computer, we could do X. Well, if you can just do some simpler things, you get things like quantum entanglement, or you get quantum encryption. And now we're finding these biological mechanisms like, how chlorophyll works, may actually be in part a quantum process. So before you get to that thing that we all have our eye on, a lot of more interesting things happen before then.
So,
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to make a comment about, I just rewatched District 9, and I tend to approach these kinds of conversations and this kind of thing from a very pop culture science fiction reference point, because that to me is that's where inspiration comes. It's where these guys get these crazy ideas that people then sometimes act on, and we end up with stuff 20 years later that matched what Captain Kirk seemed to be doing that was magic at the time. And so that's kind of my point of reference. And I remember very specifically in District 9, there is a scene where he's trying to commandeer that alien ship, and to fly it, he's got to stick his nasty claw, his organic claw, into this goo to even start the thing. Essentially, it's like a biometric key for a car. It was the only way you could turn the thing on and interact with it. And the more I think about that kind of thing, the more I think that's the future. And you're speaking a little bit to this, the idea that we will become less interfacing with machines, and we will become more the interface for the machines, or between the machines, or between each other. And that creeps ever closer to this quote-unquote pseudo singularity effect, where we're all sort of connected in a way that isn't just, well, I got the internet. It's more like, no, Tom and I are connected through some weird invisible string-based membrane across states, and we let each other know we're going to be on time for the show or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things. There's the shape of what the technology looks like. I mean, I can take apart a computer, I can look at the hard drive, I can look at everything inside of there, but until I understand how it interacts with the internet and all that, it's hard to understand what its real value is, and that's often the case with the technology. But when you get to the point where when you can put, if people talk about this forever, the idea of painting television pictures on your wall using paint, when you start getting to the point where you start putting microchips into everything, into plastics, into all that stuff, passive or otherwise, you get to this point where every material, every surface around you can be networked and part of something. And maybe it doesn't do anything. Or maybe it's just your floor to tell you how much weight you have on there, to tell you it's dirty. Or maybe you sit down to any surface and it can become an interface, which as you look at what, as display technology gets cheaper and we get the ability to make dumb things smart, just regular raw plastics by embedding stuff, you get into this idea of this, everything around you becomes part of the internet or part of the information space, and that's the hardest thing for me to wrap my head around it again, because I can put my computer under an X-ray, but it doesn't tell me anything about the internet. It doesn't tell me anything about how I fit into that as just some ape using this. But when you start thinking about how everything becomes networked and how that affects for telepresence and etc., blows my mind.
Now this
Andrew.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul, because I was going to say this seems to tie into some of the stuff you were saying earlier about replacing our organs with robotics.
Well, in fact, our brains are already there. So research I've done on oxytocin, this molecule that connects us to other people, shows that we are really, in some sense, like a cyborg. We're really connected to everybody else on the planet. And as we strengthen those connections using technology, then our ability to understand, intuit, interact with other people around the globe becomes much and much easier. So the only thing that concerns me is when Andrew said, we have a chair to sit on that's connected. I'm not sure I want my butt connected to the entire world, but my brain, yeah, I'm happy to do that.
You're one of those people who can tell the difference between those two things, though, and that's sometimes considered a unique talent. Let's go ahead and move over to Paul for his crazy ass prediction. When you're pulling one out of the thing that you were sitting on, what is your prediction for the future, sir?
My prediction in 10,000 years is that there will be no more humans. So I'm making a logical progression from my prediction 1, prediction 2 to prediction 3. In prediction 1, I said, well, we're morphing into these machine-human interfaces in 5 years. Prediction 2 is we're going to be floating around because we can solve the gravity problem. And the impact of both those things is that we'll start interbreeding with other kinds of species. And so we'll be like the Neanderthals Pandas. Now. We'll sort of laugh at them, big jaws, not so smart, share some genes perhaps. We'll say, look at those interesting folks in the 21st century. They were walking, and they had to use a keyboard to interact with other people around the globe. And we can just use that using our little silicon-based or somehow based hybrid of our organs with whatever else is in the universe. So I think we're going to harness actually electricity, unlike the first person who wrote in. We'll actually use electricity to actually harness into a mega new species.
Well, so we will be unrecognizable genetically, anyway, speaking, to the humans of old. Like you couldn't take my dental records from the year whenever I die, and then compare that to whatever we are then. And there's no, in your mind, we have completely moved away from the human genome. Basically, we become something altogether new.
Well, we won't be able to interbreed with you. So if we send off some astronauts to Jupiter, put them in suspended animation, and they come back in 5,000 years, they wouldn't be able to interbreed with the remaining new species. So it won't be Homo sapiens sapiens, it'll be Homo sapiens silicons or something. So we'll have this complete hybrid creature that doesn't have, for example, the same anatomy for reproduction. We would reproduce presumably using our brains. So it'll be brain sex, for example.
Oh, like in Demolition Man.
Yeah.
There you go.
Taco Bell all the way. I think it's interesting when you think about, different ideas about what is the post-human going to be. And I remember when as a kid, reading like Marvin Minsky and showing some examples of what some other people thought about, like what would be the most idealized form, and to see what an MIT engineer thought that would be, or a mathematician in his case. Very, very different than my own idea of what I would want to be. And I think that's a sign that there's going to be a plurality of things. I think that we're going to have some of us are going to embrace and want to use these things, and then you're going to have people who are like the Amish, or people who don't want to fully embrace all the way, or people who maybe just say, okay, I'll tinker with my genome so I can live longer and make sure my kids are going to have healthy lives, but I'm not going to connect myself all the time and back up my brain to my hard drive in the sky or what have you. So I think you're going to get there's going to be a lot of options and choices, and it's not going to be like, hey, everybody, this is what you got to do. Third arm and a tail. I think it's going to be, the furries are going to want to do their own thing. I think it's going to be a plurality. I think it's going to be a lot of choices. Even even today, you can almost change your ethnicity now through plastic technology. Plastic surgery.
Will we see humandas?
Yes. Yes.
And humans, you know what? You're the first person to ever say furries on this show. I just want to write that down somewhere. Yeah, brought up furries on this episode.
I mean, if you want to think who's going to embrace this stuff first, go to Comic-Con. I mean, Tom can tell us. He just got back from the future. He took a look at what happened when people make-believing what they wanted to be in their idealized versions of themselves, maybe even temporarily. And I think that's another thing about this stuff. This stuff becomes temporarily. Why not a breast implant that you can change the fact afterwards? Just pull up your iPhone and adjust the app to decide, how busty do I want to be? Well, how busty do I want her to be today? These things can happen, folks, and you can make it happen.
Wow, yeah.
And think of the diversity. We'll have great diversity in the human species until we speciate away from, being able to interact with each other. So that's fine. We'll have furries. We'll have baldies. We'll have floaters. All those people will be around.
It will absolutely change the conversation around race from being a prejudicial and ethnic and genetic conversation to being one of fashion. In other words, I don't like you because you're of your skin color, not because you're born that way, and I hold it against you and your people, but because you chose a really rotten skin color. Like who would choose to be plaid? What is wrong with you? I mean, it really does kind of turn the whole thing on its head, and it may sound silly, but perfectly plausible, right?
Let's take that another step, Tom. Let's go even a little more crazier. Okay, when you get into the point when you can start backing up or having aspects of your personality online or replicate them, have a computer simulate how you would respond to email, or even start building, virtual versions of yourself. Why have one identity? Why not have five? 5 Tom Merritts. One is going to be the podcast broadcaster. The other one's going to be the guy that always wanted to go bring his guitar from coffee house to coffee house and strum it. One's going to be the revolutionary.
That Tom Merritt is annoing and pretentious, but yeah.
Well, I know. That's why we're glad you settled on this one. But you could, why not have multiple identities? Forget having children. Just split yourself into the different things you want to be, and maybe merge back with yourself. Getting kinky here, I know, but going far out there when you can go do that, when you have the technology to change form, replicate, what have you, then I could get a lot more done.
I love it.
All right, we embrace your future as well. Tom, is it time for 4 questions?
Yes, I think so. This is the segment where we hit each of our guests rapid fire style with 4 questions about the future. And guests, you are not allowed to stop and think. We want you to just kind of tap into that stream of consciousness. As soon as you hear the question, first thing that comes to your mind, give us, if not a more accurate prediction, at least a highly entertaining one. And Scott, you're going to lead us off.
I am. Andrew, are you sitting comfortably? It's a question we always ask.
Yes.
All right, you look comfortable. So here we go. We got that light behind your head. It's awesome. It's kind of creepy and cool. You got a little halo effect.
It just follows me everywhere I go.
I like it. All right, here we go. First question. We think apes will be the rulers of the future, But what animal is the real threat to humanity?
Raccoons.
Of course. Perfect. You've done this before, sir.
Killer raccoons. I don't trust them. Why are they wearing masks?
Exactly.
They're everywhere. They're everywhere. And they got little hands. I mean, they got little hands like that. They just fit in. They fit in with us, and we don't even think about it. You see a raccoon, you're like, oh, raccoon. You don't think like, wait a second. They could be up to something. Yeah,
they can pick up our cell phones and have opposable thumbs and stuff. It's kind of creepy.
Could be. I'm sorry, because even like there was news. Oh, look at this baby red panda. Okay, it's a raccoon, folks. Red pandas are raccoons. They've just like hacked our acceptance now. They've got some sort of PR campaign.
They're hackoons.
That panda love, yeah. So now red raccoons are pandas now.
Oh, Tom, him and his hackoons. All right, let's see. If you could go back in time and tell someone famous about our day, who would it be?
Jefferson.
Oh, that's
Thomas
cool.
Jefferson. Yeah, that Jefferson.
And why, briefly? Why would it be Jefferson?
Jefferson was a hopefully optimistic person that had a lot of very good ideas about where the future would go. He understood the value of innovation, of freedom, free markets, and I think he would be very, very pleased to see how things have progressed and where they've gone.
Awesome. If you could go into the future and tell people one thing, what would that be?
Watch out for the raccoons.
They may already be too late. And lastly, our fourth question, what 3 things do you put in your time capsule?
What year is this going to?
Okay, let's say you put it in today and they open it in the year 2080. So it's not that far off.
2080, I'm going to put in my iPhone 3GS so they can laugh at that with their iPhone whatever superiority they have and do what we all do and we laugh, oh, those fools back then, like we had a choice. We had a choice back then. We laugh, oh, look at the silly thing they had. When you went to the cellular phone store back in 1985, all they had was a brick, okay?
Right.
I'd put my iPhone 2080. I would put in some statistics about infant mortality, longevity, average income, what it actually meant, and not these sort of weird figures we get. So they have a really good idea. This is what it looked like back then, so they could be grateful for how much greater it is on then. And then cryogenically preserved myself.
Yeah, good call. Yeah, I like that answer.
Very nice. Good job. That is as good as anyone has ever answered any of our questions.
Because that's the problem with time capsules. You're never around to see them opened up. So
I actually tried an experiment when I was a kid to try and make a time capsule to people in the future to come back and get me because I was really bored. And I couldn't figure out why they never came until months later. My brother came into my room with my time capsule. He'd run over it with the lawnmower. And I'm like, that's why it didn't work.
So awesome.
People of the future, why have you not arrived?
Very deep, guys.
All right, let's turn to you. Paul, are you sitting comfortably?
I am sitting comfortably.
Good. We shall begin then. Question number 1. How do we know how to trust aliens?
All we have to do is hug them and then we'll know.
Oh.
Free hugs. Will we one day exist only as brains, and why?
Yes, because the law of gravity has been repealed.
So we don't need all those limbs. We'll just float
Forget
around.
about the limbs. Who needs them? Fingers. That's a stupid idea anyway.
Fingers are for suckers.
Yeah.
Can political figures exist as only heads, as is foretold in the TV show Futurama?
No, they only exist as bowel movements.
And understandably, you can't really show that on TV. Nobody's going to watch that, so they tweaked it a little in the retelling. I see.
Floating poop.
That makes perfect sense. And finally, question number 4. When will you trust me?
I will trust you right now.
Ooh, the oxytocin just skyrocketed.
All right. About the love, Tom. It's all about the love.
Paul, I am so sorry we had the technical difficulties with you because it has been more than a pleasure having you on the show. Let people know where they can find you online to find more of what you do, or even offline, no matter what.
My home address is, follow me on Twitter at Paul J. Zach, or just Google me. I'll pop up. I'm everywhere. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And, of course, Andrew Mayne, a pleasure as well. Thank you for being patient and hanging in there and throwing down some really good predictions.
Well, we don't know if they're good yet, so thank you for having me.
That's the beauty of this show.
Yeah. AndrewMayne.com. Watch the future unfold.
And, of course, WeirdThings.com and all your other ventures. Thanks again.
BewareTheRaccoons.com.
Exactly. Coming soon to a website near you. Scott, anything to add before we wrap it up?
Negative, sir. I've just had a blast, as we always do. I want to thank Twit for letting us do this live, and Jammerby for running the boards, and Tom, you for hosting yet another fine episode of FourCast. Can't wait till the next one.
Oh, shucks. Stop.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Don't forget to leave comments at our website, fourcastpodcast.com, or send us along an email. Fourcastpodcast@gmail.com is the address for those, and we will see you next time.
But it's only 32 years away.
Boom.